You mentioned how your sleep improved from adding the carbohydrates in and, a myriad of other things. So like in general, something I've always wondered, and I've like considered keto. Now, like obviously I wouldn't do it chronically, but I've considered like cyclical keto more so for the cognitive like flexibility and kind of like, I don't know, sharpness you get from it, which is seems to be unmatched in terms of ability to just like dial in and be super sharp on something. For you, like, do you think that mental sharpness is almost like a fight or flight state being perpetually sustained, where like you're getting almost no serotonergic activity from the lack of carbohydrate ingestion? You're also just like in a perpetual like elevated sympathetic drive because you have like, I don't know, no sugar? Or like, how do you think the mechanism is for, like, is it a healthy process thing to be in where you're like really sharp because of keto, or is it like a byproduct of a suboptimal state potentially?
I think it's more the latter. And I mean, I've had debates on this when I've been on both sides of the issue, but if you look at it, I think acutely in people who are in ketogenic diets, cortisol will rise, sympathetic nervous system goes up, and then the body seems to like kind of calm down and say like, oh, we're not getting any carbohydrates in the near future. And they do kind of normalize, but it just makes sense evolutionarily that if you can't find carbohydrates, your body's going to say, get up at 3 a.m. and go find some freaking stuff, man. Go dig a tuber, go get some fruit somewhere. Like, I think it's absolutely, like you said, a manifestation of a heightened fight or flight sympathetic response rather than a good thing. And you do find people have improvements in brain fog, this colloquial term, when they make improvements in their diet with elimination diets. So that I think is cool. And so you can improve your cognition with, maybe phosphatidylserine will do it. I think nutrients in organs and meat will do it. A lot of things will do it. And good sleep will do it, right? So you can get good cognition without being fully keto, but yeah, you do get kind of locked in. And I think it's a result of the body pushing the accelerator real hard to make you go pick some fruit off a tree, find a hive somewhere, hunt an animal, get a little more fat. Because the fascinating thing about human physiology is we die without carbohydrates or fat. We die. We know this. This is protein, this is rabbit starvation. This is protein excess, protein toxicity. So if you're not finding carbohydrates, your body's thinking, whoa, if we lose fat right now, like, you're dead, dude. So you better either go find some fat or find some carbohydrates, or we're not making a baby, or you're not making it the next generation. So I personally, just subjectively, don't really feel like my cognition is that much different off keto than it was on keto. But maybe people will look at maybe people will look at my old stuff and be like, oh, he was way sharper when he was on keto. I don't know. I feel fine. And I like sleeping, and I like not having muscle cramps or palpitations.
So do you think the mental sharpness more so comes from a stability and blood glucose control more so than the actual, like, I'm assuming there is some sympathetic involvement with, driving you to go get glucose because you feel your brain is like, holy shit, like there's literally nothing coming in. So for you though, when you started introducing honey and fruit and whatnot, and you mentioned you didn't really notice a big difference in, mental clarity and whatnot, do you think that's a result of your glucose control and insulin sensitivity more so than anything?
I think so. And you can see this on things like continuous glucose monitors, which I do a lot. When you eat a meal of fruit and honey, you will spike your glucose, but the area under that glucose curve is going to be really low. It's a very quick response because, man, insulin sensitivity is super fascinating to me. We're going to talk about metformin today too. So hopefully we can talk about this, but I love insulin sensitivity and like the roots of the metabolic dysfunction, all this stuff. It's really, really interesting. But I do think that there's a lot of evidence in my blood work and continuous glucose monitors that I'm extremely insulin sensitive. My fasting insulin is super low. The baseline insulin is really low. The excursions are very small. The average excursions are very small. I get a spike when I eat. And I don't really worry about that. I worry much less about the absolute level to which my glucose goes postprandially, and much more about the postprandial area under the curve, because that's more reflective of like the actual insulin utilization, since we don't have a continuous insulin monitor right now, that we could check. But yeah.
Do you do anything to kind of like optimize that nutrient partitioning process, like, walking after each meal or anything of that nature? Or is it do you have like ideal control even when you're just eating a big meal and chilling at your desk?
It doesn't really have a major difference, but I think that humans kind of, we might know this intuitively. It feels better when you eat a big meal to move around a little bit. So I kind of feel that way because sometimes I get really hungry and I'll eat a pound of meat, a few ounces of organs. We have amazing fruit in Costa Rica. I'll have some raw milk and I'm like, wow, all right, I'm pretty full. So I'm going to move around a little bit. I might go do some pull-ups or just walk around the yard or move. And it kind of feels intuitive for humans. I don't do it every day. I'm not trying to like push my body to dispose of the glucose. And I actually, this is tangentially related. I'm not a fan of things like metformin or berberine to blunt that glucose response for a variety of reasons. But yeah, I think it generally happens pretty normally. Just like baseline, your default is to dispose of that stuff when you're super insulin sensitive.
Okay. Before we talk about metformin, the combination of fruit and meat, like I know a lot of people are thinking like, oh, you're combining fat and protein with sugar equals like inflammation, plaque buildup, blah, blah, blah. And it's like the common conception is protein and fat or protein and carb, but don't combine like the three at the same time. If you're metabolically healthy, presumably, is that something that's not even a consideration? You just eat like whatever you need to hit your micro and macronutrient needs for the day from high quality food, and it doesn't matter what ratios they are together and like separating them throughout the day or anything, in your opinion?
I don't worry about that at all. I've never seen any good literature to suggest it's a real problem. People will sometimes mechanistically point to like, oh, the Randall cycle. And I'm like, yeah, look at like, I'm so fat. Like, look at me getting super fat on fruit and honey and meat and fat. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's just my anecdote of N01, but I don't see it as a problem. And I've never seen anybody do an RCT or anything problematic that shows like, oh, if you eat honey with meat, then you're going to really spike your insulin. You're going to become more insulin resistant. And I mean, the labs show it. Like you can look at the CGM, you can look at the fasting insulin. It's so low. And like with really no concerns about that.
And one of the biggest components of like the Western diet that you vilify is like seed oils. And you think it's responsible for a lot of the issues that come with, metabolic dysfunction nowadays and whatnot. In like a eucaloric model or even like a calorie deficit, do you still see the like linoleic acid density of foods doing the same things, or is it in the context of somebody who's like eating in a surplus in general, where you see these issues crop up in conjunction with the linoleic acid content?
Yeah, linoleic acid is super fascinating. So, I mean, didn't the guy do the Twinkie experiment where he like lost weight and improved his insulin sensitivity eating Twinkies in a caloric deficit? So I think we know that in humans, if you have a caloric deficit, you can eat freaking whatever you want. Like you could eat probably pure sugar and pure seed oils in a caloric deficit and see your insulin sensitivity improve. Long term, I don't think that's very sustainable for humans. And I do worry, or would hypothesize, that when you return to a normal caloric diet, that your satiety is going to be off. Obviously, your nutrient adequacy is going to be low. And I think that long term, you are probably putting yourself in a pretty disadvantageous position from a satiety perspective in your brain. And I worry that's the kind of thing that's hard to quantify in a short-term study.
Yeah.
Like, so somebody does a calorie restricted Twinkie diet, and then they come back and they've pumped, a bunch of processed sugar and seed oils into their adipocytes and cell membranes throughout the body. Do they then have some altered satiety later that's going to make it hard to maintain a good body weight or a healthy body composition? That's what I would worry about. But I do think most of what we see with linoleic acid is normal caloric or hypercaloric, because one of the potential problems with linoleic acid is that it affects satiety and causes people to overeat. That's a very interesting thing. There are these cannabinoids. 2-AG is one of them. It's been studied in animal models predominantly, but we do see things in humans that suggest that that's an important thing. Also, like rimonabant is a very effective weight loss drug, and it works on this cannabinoid system. It also makes people suicidal, but it actually can affect satiety in a positive way, meaning increasing satiety by giving people rimonabant. It's an incredibly effective weight loss drug, but it turns out blocking the CB1 receptor, I believe is what it is. I don't know if it has much activity at the CB2 receptor, is great for satiety, because these cannabinoids, whether endogenous or exogenous, affect satiety negatively. They make you more hungry. People know this from Weed the Munchies, but it also is effective for proper mood, and people get suicidal and depressed when you give them rimonabant. So,
jeez,
yeah, it's not a good thing. But I think that so calorie restricted diets are not, it's not sustainable for any human. Like that's a prison. Nobody wants to live that way for the rest of their life. And what's most interesting for me from a weight loss perspective is how to let people eat to satiety and also achieve a good body composition. That's the holy grail. Like nobody's suffering. Nobody's like, I don't want to eat that. I want to eat that, but I can't eat that because I'm going to get fat. It's like, can we get people to a position? And I think we can, that's just my guess, where they can eat basically to satiety of a select group of high quality foods and still achieve a good body composition. That's living to me. That's a higher quality of life.